This is the first of a series of videos on the key principles of IDEA. In this video, we'll discuss FAPE to decide whether a student has been provided a free, appropriate public education. Courts often defer to educators and administrative review officials regarding matters of pedagogy, but courts will reject IEPs that are inappropriate. What does an appropriate education mean here? Courts have clarified that an appropriate education needs not be the best available or represent optimum programs that will maximize learning potential. In Doe v. Board of Education of Tullahoma City Schools 1993, a student was enrolled in the Tullahoma, Tennessee public school system. In November of 1989, at his parents' request, the student underwent a series of tests to determine if he suffered from any handicaps. The results of those tests indicate that the student suffered from a neurological impairment that hindered his ability to process auditory information and engaged in normal language and thinking skills. The tests also indicated that the student had a full-scale IQ of 130, which was a high IQ. Regardless, the student was entitled to special education services. After learning of students' newly discovered disability, the school district convened a multidisciplinary team meeting on the last day of the school, May 30, 1990. The parties agreed that after the student selected his courses for the fall, another multidisciplinary team meeting would be held to effectuate the development of an IEP for the student. The student never chose his courses for the fall. On June 10 or 11, 1990, the student's mother contacted a private school in Illinois about enrolling him. A month later, student and his parents visited the private school. Then, on July 18, the student's parents requested another multidisciplinary team meeting and advised the public school system that the student would be attending a private school. On August 7, the multidisciplinary team meeting was convened. The student and his parents claimed that the private school was the only appropriate placement for his needs, and that the Tullahoma public school system would be required to provide funding for his education at the private school. The multidisciplinary team declined to create an IEP until further testing could be performed in the fall. On August 21, 1990, the parents filed an action for injunctive relief in federal district court, requesting that the school system be ordered to develop an IEP and provide funding for the student to attend the private school. The district court ordered the completion of an IEP for the student. Since the student refused to select classes for the fall, the school chose the classes for the student and had each of his teachers submit programs for his progress in each of his courses. The school system's proposed IEP rejected the parents' assertion that their chosen private school was the only appropriate placement and provided that the student receive a variety of special services at the public school district. The student objected to the proposed IEP, again asserting that the private school was the only appropriate placement. The public school system's IEP was never implemented because the student began attending the private school. On September 18, 1990, a due process hearing was commenced before an administrative law judge of the Tennessee Department of Education to review the IEP and address the question of reimbursement. The administrative law judge concluded that the IEP was adequate and that the student's parents were not entitled to reimbursement. Here is a direct quote from the decision. The IDEA requires that the Tullahoma schools provide the educational equivalent of a serviceable Chevrolet to every handicapped student. Appellant, however, demands that the Tullahoma school system provide a Cadillac solely for appellant's use. We suspect that the Chevrolet offered to appellant is in fact a much nicer model than that offered to the average Tullahoma student. Be that as it may, we hold that the board is not required to provide a Cadillac, and that the proposed IEP is reasonably calculated to provide educational benefits to appellant, and therefore in compliance with the requirements of IDEA. Here is another case about how to define appropriate in a FAPE. A student in Douglas County District had autism. He had diagnosed with autism at the age of 2 and with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder a year after that. The student's autism affected his cognitive functioning, language and reading skills, and his social and adaptive abilities. The student attended Douglas County schools from preschool through 4th grade. During that time, he received special education services, including IEP tailored to meet his unique needs. By 4th grade, the student's parents believed his academic and functional progress had stalled. When the school district proposed a 5th grade IEP that resembled those from past years, the parents removed him from public school and enrolled him in a specialized private school where he made significant progress. School district representatives later presented the parents with a new 5th grade IEP, but the parents considered it no more adequate than the original plan. The parents then asked for reimbursement for their son's private school tuition by filing a complaint under the IDEA with the Colorado Department of Education. This case first went to an administrative law judge for review. The administrative law judge rejected the parents' request for reimbursement, concluding that the student's public school had provided him with free appropriate public education as required by IDEA. The district court affirmed the administrative law judge's ruling and held that the parents failed to meet their burden to prove that FAPE was not provided. The 10th Circuit also affirmed, and the court concluded that the student's IEP had been reasonably calculated to enable him to make some progress. Therefore, the student had received a FAPE. The case then went to the U.S. Supreme Court. In a unanimous decision, the U.S. Supreme Court overturned the 10th Circuit's decision. The U.S. Supreme Court interpreted the scope of the free appropriate public education and concluded that a school must offer an IEP reasonably calculated to enable a child to make progress appropriate in light of the student's circumstances. The adequacy of a given IEP turns on the unique circumstances of the child for whom it was created. This absence of a bright line rule should not be mistaken for an invitation to the courts to substitute their own notions of sound educational policy for those of the school authorities which they review. At the same time, deference is based on the application of expertise and the exercise of judgment by school authorities. The nature of the IEP process ensures that parents and school representatives will fully air their respective opinions on the degree of progress a student's IEP should pursue. Thus, by the time any dispute reaches court, school authorities will have had the chance to bring their expertise and judgment to bear on areas of disagreement. At that point, a reviewing court may fairly expect those authorities to be able to offer a cogent and responsive explanation for their decisions that shows the IEP is reasonably calculated to enable the child to make progress appropriate in light of his circumstances. GD v. Swampscott Public Schools 2022 is a recent case about FAPE. In this case, an 11-year-old student is eligible to receive special education services from her school district on account of her learning disabilities, which include severe dyslexia, dysgraphia, and a phonological processing disorder. The student attended a local private school for kindergarten and first grade. She did not receive any specialized services at the private school. The student's parents grew concerned during her first grade year about her lack of early reading and writing skills. In April 2017, the parents referred their child to her school district for an evaluation to determine whether she was eligible for special education services. With the consent of the parents and while she was still attending private school, the school district conducted psychological and academic assessments of the student. The school district determined that the student was eligible to receive special education services due to a learning disability that affects her reading, writing, and mathematics abilities. The school district convened a meeting to discuss the result of the evaluations between the parents, teachers who would provide the special education services set forth in the proposed IEP, and the representatives from the school district. At that June 7, 2017 meeting, the parents asserted that an appropriate response to the disabilities identified in the school district's assessment would involve a science-based academic program for dyslexic students. They also asserted that neither the student's current private school nor the school district was equipped to provide appropriate services for their daughter. As a result, the parents requested that the student be placed at a substantially separate school for children with language-based disabilities. The school district rejected this request and proposed an IEP for her second grade year on June 20, 2017. The proposed IEP offered the student special education services that would be provided to her 5 times a week during the school year and 4 times a week during the preceding summer. The June 2017 IEP indicated that during the school year, the student would receive the designated services in a partial inclusion placement at an elementary school within the school district, meaning that she would receive some specialized instruction in a language-based classroom and inclusion support in other subjects in the general education setting. The IEP also provided that the student would receive an extended evaluation during the first 8 weeks of her second grade year. Later that month, the parents sent a letter to the school district that indicated their intention to conditionally accept the proposed IEP and the placement corresponding to it, despite their view that the IEP was not sufficient to allow the student to make effective progress. The parents also indicated that they would arrange to have a private specialist evaluate the student during the summer, and they requested that the results of the specialist's evaluation be discussed at the next convened meeting in October. During that summer, the student received the extended year reading instruction services that were provided in the IEP. Those services consisted of 2 45-minute sessions each week of reading instruction from special education teachers. And after the student had completed her summer instruction, the private specialist conducted his planned evaluation of the student. The evaluation involved the private specialist's administration of tests designed to assess oral and written language skills. Based on this testing, the private specialist determined that the student met the criteria for diagnosis of dyslexia, double deficit phonological processing disorder, dysgraphia, and a language impairment that impacted the student's ability to convey her thoughts orally and in writing. The private specialist also strongly recommended that the student's special education services be provided within a substantially separate educational program housed within a school that is designed especially to meet the needs of students, such as the students who demonstrate severe language-based learning disabilities. The student's second grade year began in late August 2017. Pursuant to the IEP, the student participated in the general education classroom at the school district with support for science, social studies, and non-academic activities, and separated from the general education class for a part of the school day to work on reading, writing, and math skills in individual or small group sessions with a special education teacher. In November, the private specialist conducted a re-evaluation of the student to measure progress in her reading and writing skills using several of the same assessments that he had administered to the student in August. The private specialist concluded that the student's assessment scores provided no evidence of effective progress resulting from the 3 months of instruction and the special education services that the student received from the school district as a result of the IEP. The private specialist further concluded that it was extremely critical that the student be placed in an alternative education setting as soon as possible. The school district then held another meeting on November 21, 2017, to discuss the result of the private specialist evaluation. At that meeting, the school district proposed an amendment to the IEP that would place the student in a substantially separate language-based classroom instead of the previous placement under which the student had received instruction in a general education class for the bulk of the school day, but also received specialized pull-out individual or small group instruction from special education teachers. The student's parents initially rejected this proposed amendment to the IEP. In January 2018, however, the parents accepted the amendment after the school district proposed it as a part of an 8-week extended evaluation of the student. In March 2018, at the conclusion of the extended evaluation period, the school district administered to the student several formal and informal assessments to measure her progress since the beginning of the school year. According to the school district, those assessments demonstrated that the student was improving her oral reading fluency and making progress in writing. A quarterly progress report issued by the student's teachers at her public school in the school district in the same month noted that the student was making progress on the goals identified in her IEP. Around the time of this evaluation, the student's parents submitted an application for their daughter's admission to a private school that specializes in the instruction of and exclusively teaches school children with learning disabilities. As part of the application process, the private school administered standardized tests to the student measure her reading and writing abilities as well as her learning aptitude. The private school accepted the application shortly thereafter. Later in the month, the school district convened another meeting with the students' parents to discuss the results of its extended evaluation of the student. A report from the private specialist concerning the student's progress, and a progress report from the student's teachers at her local private school. At the meeting, the school district shared its view that the student was making progress due to the services that she received in her new placement, and proposed that the placement continue beyond the extended evaluation period on which the school district and the parents had earlier agreed. The parents expressed their view that the student was not making effective progress in the placement, and she in fact had regressed and needed an outside placement. The parents also informed the school district of the student's acceptance at the private school and stated their intention to unilaterally place the student at the private school for the upcoming school year. In addition, the parents informed the school district that they would seek reimbursement from the school district for expenses associated with the student's placement at the private school and would seek a due process hearing before the Massachusetts Bureau of Special Education Appeals to secure the reimbursement. 3 days after the meeting, the parents sent to the school district a letter that stated their intention to unilaterally place the student at the private school and to seek full reimbursement of all costs related to the student's enrollment at the private school. 1 week after sending that letter, the parents submitted a hearing request to the Massachusetts Bureau of Special Education Appeals. The parents alleged, among other things, that the school district had denied the student a FAPE because it had failed to deliver the student the services set forth in her 2017 to 2018 IEP, that the IEP had caused regression for the student and has not resulted in effective progress, and the proposed IEP and the placement fails to promote the student's development in all areas of need, and that the IEP was not appropriately ambitious and lacked measurable goals related to reading. The hearing officer concluded that the parents failed to prove by a preponderance of evidence that the IEP provided by the school district were not reasonably calculated to provide the students with a free appropriate public education, and that as a consequence, the school district was not required to reimburse the parents for the cost of their unilateral placement of the student at the private school. Later, the district court judge agreed, holding that the school district had provided the students with a free appropriate public education as required by the IDEA. The First Circuit affirmed the district's ruling. In this video, I introduced the FAPE. I used 3 cases to explain how courts have defined appropriate in free appropriate public education. In the next video, I'll introduce the second principle of IDEA, eligibility and evaluation.